Okay, so one of the central concepts of economics, demand. So you need to know what is meant by demand, what is meant by consumer surplus, and you need to be able to draw that diagram and show how consumer surplus changes with the change in the price. And you need to look at how demand can shift with non-price factors and know the difference between price changes and shifts. So demand, oh, here we go, markets. The quantity of a product that consumers are able and willing to purchase at various prices over a period of time. It is in the specification, if you just go back, understand what is meant by demand. It's clearly stated in there, but there's never been a question before that's asked for that definition. Now, there used to be ones on the old specification, on the old exams that did, so just watch out for that. Make sure you know your definition of what demand is. So when we're thinking about demand, we're thinking about how much of a product would someone want for various prices. So if you imagine the market for sandwiches, and you can kind of ask a classroom full of people, as I do at the beginning of the year, of students, how many people would want to buy a sandwich for various prices. So imagine I have 10 students, and probably it would look something a little bit like this. So 0, probably most people would want it, taking into account there's nothing actually wrong with this sandwich. And at £5, most people would say that's a little bit too expensive for me, so I'm not going to purchase that. But obviously somebody who wants to purchase it for £4.50, we could probably say wants it a little bit more than somebody who would only be willing to spend 50p on it, or maybe they have more money than the other person, but various reasons for that. So then we can plot this on a diagram, and we always put price along the vertical axes and the quantity along the horizontal axes. So we get something that looks downward sloping. And this is logical because the higher the price, the less is demanded in terms of the quantity, and the lower the price, the more people want it, maybe because they are able to afford it more readily. So basically, the demand curve just shows that relationship between the quantity and the price of the product. And a demand schedule, it's in your textbook, but it doesn't come up on the exam. It's just the data used to plot that curve. Okay, these are quite interesting as well, looking at notional demand and effective demand. So there's notional demand for most products. You know, I would really like a Porsche, but my demand for that is not effective because I can't afford it. So when we're looking at demand and we're looking at a demand schedule, we're looking at a demand curve, we're thinking of effective demand. So people are willing, but they also have the ability to pay for this product. So when we're thinking about demand, we're thinking about effective demand, as I've just said. We also have this concept of ceteris paribus, which becomes important on comment on questions. So when we're looking at changes in a diagram, we're assuming that nothing else has changed. We're just looking at kind of one factor that may have changed, or a few factors, but those will be stated factors. And that we're looking at the third assumption is we're looking at a certain point in time as well. So a movement along a demand curve is is caused by a change in the price of a product. You will find out when you watch, if you watch the supply presentation, that a movement along a demand curve is actually caused by a shift in supply. But as you can see from this diagram here, if we charge £4.50, we're going to get one person wanting the sandwich. But if we lower the price to £1, we're going to get 8 people that want the product. So that would be a movement along the demand curve. It could go up or it could go down, but that's caused by a change in price. Okay, but sometimes when we buy products, we are actually willing to pay more for them than we actually paid, and usually people say, oh, what a bargain, when they get something like that. But we can't write that in the exam. It's called consumer surplus. Again, a 2-mark definition question, so make sure you learn this. So it's the extra amount that a consumer is willing to pay for a product above the price that is actually paid. And on a diagram, it would look like this. Now, key tip If you have to draw a consumer surplus, just draw demand, because it gets very confusing if you draw supply. So think consumer surplus, consumer, that's related to demand, and it's this top triangle here. It's the amount above the price, the equilibrium price there that you can set. Okay, so typical exam question, define the term consumer surplus. And then usually they're going to ask you to draw a consumer surplus diagram, but they're going to ask you to change the price. Now, in this case, the price of this product has been increased. This is just down here is just something I've copied from the mark scheme. And what happens is you get a smaller triangle at the top. So when the price increases, you actually get a loss of consumer surplus. This funny, I don't know if it's like a half trapeze shape, but this shape here is the loss in consumer surplus. And then the triangle above is the new consumer surplus there. So you either have to find some way of kind of doing some clever shading, because you're not allowed to use colours in the exam, or you can actually just label it like these points A, B, C. So A, B, C would be the new consumer surplus, and B, D, E, B, C, D, E even. That trapeze shape could be the loss of consumer surplus. If the price decreases, what you get is a bigger triangle. So what you'd be wanting to label this is not loss, you'd want to be labeling this as additional consumer surplus. Okay, so that's consumer surplus, that's demand, but we've got these other factors that can influence demand. So a shift in demand is caused by a non-price factor. Okay, so we can have shifts in demand outwards, so demand increasing, or a shift inwards, so demand decreasing for some reason. So lots and lots of different reasons why demand could shift. But if you just stick to these kind of ones here, which are mentioned in the book, and you've COTS W, COT W, or if you change weather to seasons, you've got COTS, but basically it's a change in your consumer income, a change in the price of other products, a change in tastes and fashion, or a change in weather or seasons, seasonal effects. So, lots of information on this page. If your consumer income increases, basically, you just need to look at the green here. So if you've got a high, oh, sorry, no, not the green, but just imagine that your consumer income increases, you have more money to spend, so you can afford more products. Simple. Demand usually would increase. If your income decreases for some reason, maybe you're paying more income tax, or maybe your benefits have been cut, you have less money to afford products. So you would assume that your demand curve would shift inwards. However, as usual in economics, it can be a little bit more complex than that. So you have to think about what type of product it is. So if you win the lottery, I really doubt that tomorrow you're going to go out and buy a TV that looks like that TV there, which looks to me like it's black and white and doesn't have, I don't think that'd even work. If your income goes up, it's unlikely that you're just going to live off a diet of potatoes, or and if your income goes up, although that looks like a really nice bike, it's unlikely that you're gonna, that's gonna be your main mode of transport. I mean, if it were me, I'd be flying private jet or helicopter everywhere. So what we get is you've got to think about what type of good is this? Is this a normal good, as in if your income increases, the quantity demanded increases, or if your income decreases, quantity demanded decreases? Or is this what we call an inferior good? So if your income increases, the quantity demanded decreases, okay? So you're kind of trading up onto something better. And if your income decreases, the quantity demanded increases. So if we look at some examples here, these are some examples my students came up with, inferior, and this is not a judgment on the quality of the product, this is just an economic term. My students said kind of smart price or the value range at Tesco and Asda would be an inferior good, whereas the extra special or chosen by you range would be the normal good. So you've got more income, you spend more on that. An inferior good, usually buses, except out in London. Buses aren't inferior in London, but outside London tend to be inferior, whereas the normal good would be the car. Inferior, the rice or potatoes. So kind of, I'm thinking of people in China maybe that don't have very much money. Most of their diet's made up of kind of staple goods like rice, whereas tend to get a little bit more money. They might introduce more meat into their diet. Well, my students here have said Blackpool isn't inferior good. I don't personally believe that, but probably economically it would work out as an inferior good. And Florida would be the normal good, and then Primark and kind of Topshop. But maybe you're more like normal. Could be, I don't know, more designer wear or something. But lots and lots of examples you can have a think about there. Second factor that could shift demand inwards or outwards would be the price of other products. So a change in a complement spelled with an E, or a substitute. So you can see that hot dogs and popcorn are probably substitutes for each other. You probably go to, the stand, the kiosk, and you get one or the other, unless you're getting a combo, but you choose between the two. So the price of, when you're thinking about the demand for popcorn, the price of a hot dog might actually affect it. And a complement would be like bowling and having a hot dog. They go quite nicely together, I've found in the past. So lots and lots of substitutes there. Lamb or beef, kind of minced lamb, minced beef. You can't really tell that much of a difference. Should we take a taxi or should we drive? Should we wear heels or flat shoes? I had girls in my class last year, so they're quite gender specific, some of these examples. Whereas complements be fish and chips, nails and glue, very gender specific. Rice and curry, a bat and a ball, whiteboard and pen, cereal and milk. Those things go together. They get joint consumption is another term for it. So what happens to the price of other products? So if product A and B are substitutes and the price of B increases, most people are going to switch from consuming B to consuming A. So I'm just thinking, what was the first example? Lamb or beef. So if the price of beef, minced beef, increases, just switch to buying minced lamb. If the price of product A decreases, probably people that were consuming product B might switch to consuming product A. Whereas if they're complements, so C and D are complements, if the price of C increases, because you consume them together, demand for D would decrease. So what have we got there? Fish and chips. So if the price of fish increases, maybe people switch to, I don't know, pizza. So they're not gonna eat those chips. And if the price of fish decreases, maybe more people switch to the chip shop and getting fish and chips. So demand for chips would actually increase. Okay, taste and fashion. So I've got a video here of MC Hammer, which was probably filmed way before you were born, but he wears some strange fashion in this. But a few years ago, Cheryl Cole brought out a video, Fight for this love or your love or whatever, but it really reminded me of this MC Hammer video because it just the dance moves and the clothes. So fashions come and go, and a few years after the fashion you probably look at photos of yourself and think, what was I wearing? So taste and fashion do change. Advertising can affect taste and fashion. Celebrity endorsements, those types of things can affect taste and fashion. Another factor actually that I've not got a slide for, but population, the size of your market can affect the demand for a product. If your market increases in size, population increases, obviously, as long as it's kind of the tastes and fashion haven't changed either, so ceteris paribus, demand should increase for the product. And then lastly, weather can affect the demand for a product. So I always like to show the students this picture and think, what kind of things would be on this woman's mind? This is shows a picture of the flooding situation in Pakistan a few years ago. You know, what kind of things would this woman be thinking that she needs to get? What kind of things would be very far from her mind? You know, so maybe shelter or something to build shelter with at this point in time, you'd see a big shift, an increase in demand, so a shift to the right on your diagram. Okay, so here's just a little summary page. So I've not drawn the diagram at the bottom there, but that would just be a shift to the left. But a shift to the right, so it would be an increase in demand caused to an increase in consumer income for a normal good, of course, a rise in the price of substitutes, a fall in the price of complements, or a positive change in taste and fashion. Whereas a shift to the left would be a fall in consumer income for normal goods, a fall in the price of substitutes, a rise in the price of complements, or a negative change in taste and fashion. Maybe like a bad news story's come out, or has been a health scare or something. And then finally, final factor that we need to think about when we're thinking about demand is what is revenue? So revenue is the money that businesses receive from selling their goods and services. And you can show it on a demand and supply diagram. So it's just the price of your product times by how many you've sold of your product, otherwise known as quantity. So price times quantity. And you can see that area under your diagram there, that's that area represents the total revenue of your product. Okay, so that covers all the specification objectives for that section.